Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about all things fintech. What's the most fun part of doing what you're doing or building what you're building? If you see those as two different questions.
Yeah, so I think the first part is just the cross section of the people that we end up working with and the challenges we get to help them tackle. So every day I get to talk to fintech product leaders sort of around the world and really enjoy jamming with them on how they're thinking about accounts payable or bill pay, how we think about it, and being able to share what we've learned from our past experiences. It feels like, through those conversations, we're actually increasing the number of players in the AP automation market. And I think ultimately this really bodes well for up-leveling sort of B2B payment experiences throughout the US and the globe. So something that I think a lot of folks who are privy to fintech today will realize is that, the total payment volume for B2B payments in the US is around $25 trillion. And a majority of these payments are happening manually, whether they're being managed manually on a spreadsheet or paid manually through checks or manual ACH transactions. And so, huge problem space. And we're starting to arm the rebels against what I would say are the big incumbents here who've already seen the opportunity and taken the leaps and bounds to go after it, with still plenty of room for folks to play. And I think that really energizes me and wakes me up every morning.
Let's talk about disruption. What industries do you think can be disrupted by the advancements in fintech? And perhaps what sectors do you think are immune?
Yeah, so I think, I always find the word disrupt to be a little aggressive. I think with all things with money and finance, the point isn't to turn things upside down. It's more about shifting the paradigm to unlock new value for all players in that space. And so when I think about that, some of the industries that I think are going to that have the biggest opportunities for changing the paradigm and unlocking new value is around construction, transportation and logistics, and home services. And so specifically, when we look at construction today and we're talking to folks, one problem that we keep seeing these platforms running into is that if their customer is a general contractor, today that general contractor is usually issuing payments to subcontractors in the form of checks. This is a bit of just what's expected and normal in the industry, but also a result of the lack of technology solutions to make it easier to facilitate digital payments. So when a GC is issuing a check to a sub, there's a variety of issues that end up showing up here. Number one, it's slow and manual. They have to go in and either print these checks and sign them manually, or in some cases, write them out. And then when you're issuing checks to folks, you're not in control of when they're actually going to cash that check. And so until that check is cashed, you have to ensure that there's enough cash in the account for you to maintain cash flow until that check is deposited. And then as a result of this, the reconciliation around the payment is also very painful because it's usually the information sitting in a checkbook, in a manually printed checkbook that you then need to go and add to another system. Now, in moving to digital payments, and if we think about that same payment flow, subs can now be paid faster when they're paid digitally. The general contractor is better able to manage their cash flow with near real-time payments, and reconciliation is also much easier as a result. And so as we look at B2B platforms that are in this kind of space, they have the opportunity to offer more tailored financial services when everyone is starting to move through a digital payment workflow in an industry that we believe has been historically underserved. And so that's, I think, one area that we're super excited about. Now, when we think about sectors that are a little bit more immune to technology, the sort of, elephant in the room is the real estate industry. And just kind of, historically, it's the kind of industry that is fairly risk averse. It's always about control and doing things the way that they're done so you don't rock the boat. And there we see a ton of payments still happening in checks, manual payments, lots of back and forth between, a landlord and their property management teams, as an example. And I think we're still in the early days of digitizing that. We're starting to see players kind of pop up around the country that are going to tackle this, but it's still really early days and a bit of an uphill battle.
Well, why? Why is this sector seemingly immune to
Yeah.
technology?
So the thing is, real estate itself is a primarily relationship driven industry. And I think that even kind of extends out to banking and financial services. So like most landlords end up knowing their banker, right? And there's a really rich relationship and history between the bank and that landlord themselves. And so unless you're working with a bank that's like super technology first, which generally isn't the case when you're thinking about real estate, you're going to end up with a lot of like the old school way of doing things. I also think just the average age of a professional in real estate tends to lean a little bit older, where people are used to kind of doing things the way that they're always done. We're now starting to see that transition where the decision makers and folks who are ultimately responsible for the financial sort of health of these businesses are now starting to skew to more millennials or digital first types of professionals, but it's still really early days, right? Like if you've got someone who's been in the real estate industry since the 70s, they've been cutting checks to their team, they have like rich relationships with all their vendors, and they know everyone and have a relationship with everyone around their business. It's a much harder sell to tell them to go digital because they don't see the value in it. They're like, I could pay my contractor digitally, but I know that they're going to come in every week and ask for their check. And my secretary knows that like this is the day the check needs to be ready. Plus, I get an excuse to be able to have some FaceTime with them. And so there's less of a perceived problem for these types of players.
Double clicking one more time,
Yeah.
then do we just have to wait for a new generation to come in, a generation that's born with technology, and when they get to those roles naturally, they're going to use technology in that workflow?
I think it's two part. One is that, but the other part is that we're still in the early days of starting to see more and more software providers providing new financial solutions in the real estate industry. And so, it's still very early days for that. So the types of folks in real estate who are adopting those solutions are what I would consider to be early adopters. And we still haven't crossed the chasm yet on, sort of the majority of the market starting to adopt these solutions. So part of it is sort of cycling out a generation of folks who aren't used to digital payments and digital workflows. But the other part too is in new technology providers popping up to provide differentiated solutions within real estate itself. We're seeing some of it now in residential and commercial, but a majority of the players have maybe started in the last 3 to 4 years. And, with real estate itself, I think you usually have to think about timelines in terms of decades, because these really are very predictable and sort of cash flow heavy businesses. So yeah, it's a long game when it comes to real estate.
Zoom out a little bit. Let's talk about the fintech space more broadly. Do you think it's getting crowded?
I don't. So, going back to this idea of like $25 trillion in B2B payment volume happening in the US, with a majority of those payments happening manually, I actually believe there's a huge blue ocean opportunity to folks to go after. And so there is a ton of room in this market for multiple players. I think, there's niches, riches and niches is something I've heard a few times. And we're starting to see that too with different vertical SaaS and different B2B management platforms popping up for very specific use cases within different industries themselves. So like even in construction, everyone may think that one construction company is the same as the other, but a construction company that focuses on building homes is going to operate much differently than a construction company that specializes in building commercial real estate or like large skyscrapers and buildings. And so while you could create a generic solution that will serve both of these types of customers, at the end of the day, customers are also starting to look for solutions that are ideally created for their business. And so there's just huge opportunity here to be able to like sort of unlock value in the specific details around the niche, right? So when you look at it from 10,000 feet, everything kind of looks the same. But as you dive deeper into the weeds, you start to realize that whether it's the workflows, the processes, the compliance that these organizations have to adhere to, they really do differ in like very specific ways. And that's where I think that we might not have enough fintechs or fintech providers coming in today.
Love it. Last one on the topic of fintech. What are some of the best fintech learning resources you recommend people if they want to get educated about the space?
Yeah, so the first one I recommend is Payment Systems in the US, the third edition by Carol Coy Benson. The second book I like to recommend is The Field Guide to Global Payments by Sophia Goldberg. Then I've got two Slack channels that I really like. One is the Cambrian Founder Slack channel run by Rex Cambrian at Cambrian Ventures. And then the second is the This Week in Finance Slack community. And they also have a great newsletter as well. And so in both of these communities, you will end up meeting and chatting with folks who have been in fintech for a long time and in a variety of different areas. So whether it's consumer, B2B, real estate, construction, sort of the sky's the limit, you will end up meeting folks who have that experience. I thought something cool was there was a gentleman who joined the Cambrian Founder Slack channel who worked at one of the first banks to launch an API. And like, so, you know, you end up finding people with decades and decades of experience around this space. And it's something I think that's unmatched. I've never been able to find that just trawling through LinkedIn myself.
You said the book Payment Systems in the US. I think I read it. It's a little dry, isn't it?
It is, but I think like if you're looking at building any sort of payment or fintech product in the US, this book gives you like the foundation for understanding the way of the world today. And I think like that's kind of the dirty secret of fintech is that we are dealing with very dry subject matter. And so better to understand it and like know it and then start to build than to start to build, run into like already known issues or areas that you're kind of getting blocked on that are blocked for a reason and then having to go back and read it. But yeah, it's definitely not like fun bedtime reading. It's something you have to like dedicate time to.
Sweet.